Thank you, Cheryl. I first want to thank you and the Green Team for bringing us together this evening with a creative program and an opportunity for us to learn, and also to be with Michael Appel from the Brandeis Heller School, which is such a privilege, a wonderful scholar and do-gooder in our community as well. And I think it has been many years that the Green Team has been hoping that you might join us for some learning. So welcome, Michael, and it is great to see all of you here this evening. I would love to start with a brief teaching, and I'm going to stay for a little bit. I am dividing my time tonight between the Green Team and also the Leadership Council. So excuse me if I bounce back and forth, which is easy to do between Zoom. So I thought just 2 nights before Hanukkah begins that we would enjoy some inspiration from the Hanukkah story tonight. I'm not sure if you've ever thought about it this way, but the miracle of Hanukkah, and I speak both, there's 2 miracles of Hanukkah, of course, the miracle of the oil and the miracle of the Battle of the Maccabees victory. The miracles of Hanukkah really are an epic story of conservation. I'm not sure if you've thought about it this way, but how does 1 day's worth of oil last for 8 days? It's a story of conservation. And I think it's quite incredible to think of that story at this time, because sometimes when we are in crisis mode, of course, I used to hear many stories from my grandparents about the Great Depression, that living in a time of crisis definitely demands us to try to live with less, which was certainly the story of a few generations ago for us. And I think for many of us during this time of pandemic, we do have to try to live in that way. And instead of thinking about surviving on less, I want us to think about living more sustainably. And I think Hanukkah gives us a beautiful inspiration to do that. The story also, in a way we hear 1 night lasts for 8. That's such a miracle. But I'd like to think of it as once a miracle happens, it becomes a reality, meaning it's happened once. So perhaps it can happen again. So what is the lesson of, living that way for an enduring time? Hanukkah, there are many Jewish organizations at this time who have utilized the metaphor of light to help us think about conserving energy at this time. We've had light bulb campaigns during Hanukkah, which is a good reminder to choose sustainable energy if it's time to switch your light bulbs. But so Hanukkah is often made Jewish people focus on the energy that they use and the carbon footprint that they have. For others, Hanukkah in the holiday time has been a time of consumerism, which I think is quite interesting as well. But if you really look at the values of Hanukkah traditionally and spiritually, the opposite is quite true. Not consumerism, but conservation is and should be the value and the trend that we should see. So I also want to share one more teaching that I actually learned this year for the first time about Hanukkah, and it comes to us from the historian Josephus, who wrote about this period of time of the Maccabees. And Josephus writes about the Maccabees. Did you know that the Maccabees did not fight on Shabbat? Has anyone considered this before, heard this teaching? You can raise your hand if you had. No, so this was new for me too. So Josephus teaches reminds us that the Maccabees were pious Jews, and this is indeed who they were. They were fighting in order to restore the spiritual freedom and the freedom for the Jewish people to practice the mitzvot quite traditionally. So it makes sense that they wouldn't pick up their arms or destroy anything or fight, even if it were for a holy cause. That's not something that they would do on Shabbat. And Josephus writes that the Greek Syrian army knew this about them and would often attack them on Shabbat to catch them off guard. But the Maccabee army would not respond on Shabbat, which certainly means that they suffered great losses at this time. So, what an enormous sacrifice they made for the sake of their tradition and their faith. So this is inspiring to me because I like to think that it's not despite their rest, but with their rest, with the conservation of their energy, while replenishing the valuable natural resources that they had. It is for those reasons that they were successful. So I pray that Hanukkah for us will be a holiday, a great reminder of the value of conservation, a festival to renew our energy, literally, and to renew ourselves. For I have to believe that the power and the miracle of the Maccabees, the oil of the Chanukiah, that these were not finite energy sources that were burned, but rather renewable energies that were maintained and sustained. So I hope that will be an inspiration for us this year. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Cheryl.
Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you. So I have the great pleasure to introduce Michael Appel. He began teaching at Brandeis in 2003. He developed and taught the school's first courses in corporate social responsibility, corporations and communities, and managing the triple bottom line, which led to feature stories in the Boston Globe and the Christian Science Monitor. He also organizes and leads panels on topics ranging from green skills to climate change. Michael is the assistant director of the Heller MBA program and serves as the faculty advisor for the Brandeis chapter of Net Impact, which he organized in 2005. Mr. Appel has a strong macro interest in the ethics of globalization and is particularly focused on helping students understand new models for interaction between corporations, nonprofits, and the various communities they serve. Prior to joining the Heller faculty in 2012, Michael spent 32 years working in nonprofit management and development. From 2001 to 2011, he served as Executive Director of Development and External Affairs and an adjunct faculty member at the Brandeis International Business School. Mr. Appel also spent 15 years as president of the 210 International Footwear Foundation. So with that, I will turn this over to Michael Appel and let's greet him. Please turn on your videos. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate your pulling this session together and for all the good work you're doing for the Green Team. And it's great to see so many of you here in your nice warm homes on a cold, frigid Tuesday evening. I'm glad that we could all be together and hopefully our conversation will warm up the evening a little bit for us. I have some thoughts and some comments and a couple of slides to share with you tonight, but I hope that you will join in the conversation and help to keep it as lively as we possibly can by hearing each other's thoughts and comments. I do want to admit at the very beginning that I originally volunteered for a different session. I volunteered to lead the temple's Hanukkah cooking class, also known as TBL, the best latke, but I was rejected for not having sufficient expertise. I also want to note that this is a temple that I believe should be a worldwide pace setter, and I would love to see Temple Beth Elohim become the first synagogue in the world to have LED Hanukkah candles. So maybe that's something we could take on as a potential project going forward. So a little more seriously, thank you also, Rabbi Rachel, for your comments, which really lead nicely into our conversation about the triple bottom line, which really is a new way of thinking about the business world. Triple bottom line meaning companies that have a traditional financial bottom line, but also add a social bottom line and an environmental bottom line. The question we're going to ask ourselves is that a real thing? How does that actually work? And does it actually help us to solve any of the really big challenges that we have in our present day world? Before we get there, I'm going to ask each of you to help me out with something. Please turn to the person on your right in your grid, and I'm going to ask you to shake hands with them, the person on your right. Okay, okay. The person on your right. And now I'm going to ask you to turn to the person on your left as best you can and shake hands with them, person on your left. Okay, okay. So now I need to ask you, how did that feel?
Silly.
Silly, okay. Anyone else?
Awkward.
Awkward, okay. Anybody else?
Empty.
Empty, okay. So we are going to be spending quite a bit of time this evening talking about something called, believe it or not, the awkward handshake. That's what it's called, the awkward handshake. And it's the handshake between business and society. The interests of business over here, the interests of our society over here, where do they actually come together? And are they really at odds with each other all the time? Or is there a way, awkward though it might be, where the interests of business and the interests of society can actually coincide and help each other out? And the reason this is so critical is that in today's world, many people have lost faith in government to actually create major societal change. Government's too polarized, it's too politicized, it's too dysfunctional. I think you're well aware of what's going on with our government today. In addition, a lot of people feel that our nonprofit community, even though it might be intentionally very strong, doesn't always have the resources, doesn't always have the expertise, and doesn't really have the scale that we would like to have to solve the really huge social and environmental problems that are confronting us today. So that leaves the other sector, and that's the business sector, a sector that a lot of people used to think is evil or different or bad. The sector that some people said, well, that's the sector that's causing the problems. How can we help to think about them as a sector that could actually help to solve some of those problems? So I'd like to share a different perspective on that today. And I'd like to begin with Louis Brandeis. Now, Brandeis was a social justice reformer, one of the greatest in American history. And he did not believe that government or the nonprofit sector was going to solve our social problems. In fact, he wrote an entire book about the subject about 100 years ago called Business of Profession. And he believed that it was the business community that was actually going to help us to bring about a new era. He felt that by training people in the business world, giving them the stature and the expertise and the data that they needed, he believed in something called scientific management. Imagine that, believing in science. And Brandeis was a data nerd in his day. He wrote something called the Brandeis Briefs on the Supreme Court, using actual data to guide decisions. And he really believed that as the profession of business develops, the great industrial and social problems expressed in the present social unrest will one by one find solution. Another perspective comes a little bit later in the 20th century from the great management guru, Peter Drucker, who said, every single social and global issue of our day is really a business opportunity in disguise. So triple bottom line is a framework. It's a way of thinking about the world in which business is not the enemy, but business is an entity that sees opportunities in our challenges, both social and environmental challenges. And the real question is, how do we convince businesses that they can be a major player, that they have to be a major player in solving our social and environmental problems. So for guidance on that, a number of years ago, I decided to go to a gentleman who grew up here in Brookline. His name is Andrew Savitz. He was a Rhodes Scholar and eventually became the head of the global sustainability practice at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And then later in life, he came back to the local area and he became the sustainability coordinator for the city of Newton. He's been my mentor. His book is one that I use in my class. He came to speak a number of times in my class. And very sadly, earlier this year, he passed away at a rather young age. And so I'm kind of dedicating tonight's talk to his memory and really to his inspiration. When I first got to know him, I challenged him and I said, Andy, if you had 15 minutes to get in front of a major corporation and convince them that this triple bottom line approach could work and it's something that they should adopt, show me how you would convince them in 15 minutes. So he took up my challenge and he put together a short PowerPoint, and I'd like to share it with you tonight and get your reactions to it. During this PowerPoint, I hope you'll jump in, unmute yourself with comments and questions as we go along. All right, so this is how Andy saw the world when he put together this PowerPoint. And it's really interesting to see how the world has moved on as well. But he really believed that business and society, that awkward handshake, that you could bridge that by creating sweet spots. And here's how he thought about doing it. He first goes back and asks us to think about, I know a few of us may have been around in the 1950s and remember these days, but in the 1950s, corporations had to make money and they were expected to make gifts to philanthropy. And life was pretty simple and easy for them, all things considered. But if you look ahead to the 1970s, things got a little bit more complicated for companies. And now all of a sudden, they were responsible for thinking about protecting the environment and, thanks to Ralph Nader and a few others, safeguarding their products. Look ahead now, just a few more years. Look at all the things that companies are expected somehow to think about doing. Diversity, protecting workers, child labor, public health, human rights, addressing poverty, technology, corruption, supply chain, engaging stakeholders, measuring and reporting what they're doing, continuous improvement, just an extraordinary number of things changing the way the world worked. And remember, this didn't happen over 500 years or over 200 years. All of these changes took place just over a period of about 50 or 60 years, just an extraordinary movement. And a lot of this had to do with globalization and digitization and all kinds of major changes that took place in our society, not to mention the civil rights movement. I'm wondering from those of you listening, if you were putting on another chart for the year 2021, if you were going to add another column, what would you add here that Andy missed in 2008? What other issues might you want to see addressed?
Reducing the wealth gap.
Okay, reducing the wealth gap.
Uh,
That's something he missed.
Protect
Anything else?
protect your technology from being invaded by bad people.
Privacy, huge, huge issue. Thanks, Jeff. Anyone else? I know you had a talk last night, I believe Cheryl was telling me about. Maybe you want to mention the topic of that? No.
This is a racial wealth gap in the Boston area particularly.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole racial justice issue, which I think goes beyond simply promoting diversity. So lots of big issues coming up that corporations are trying to address. And what Andy was trying to say was that corporations are now entering the larger world of our society in many ways that they didn't before. Then something happened on August 29th, 2005 that pushed this new view of the world forward. Anybody know what this is?
Katrina?
Yes, Hurricane Katrina. So why would that have anything to do with Andy's subject of corporate responsibility and sustainability? Why does he throw this slide in there? Who wants to speculate about that?
Maybe because we're starting to see these natural catastrophes as a result of things that we've messed with in the environment.
And it
Right.
hit like right down by Wall Street.
Excuse me, Phyllis?
The hurricane hit right by Wall Street also. Hurricane Sandy, right?
Right, Hurricane
Oh, that was
Sandy
later.
also.
Sorry. Yeah.
But
Sorry.
that was later, but also
You're right.
important. Yeah. Another issue that came up, I think one of the major reasons was certainly about climate change, but also the fact that who responded so well to the victims? Was it FEMA? Was it the federal government? It was actually Walmart. It was actually Home Depot and Lowe's. It was actually corporations that had the expertise and the transportation and the infrastructure and the know-how to respond to people in a way that the government didn't. And all of a sudden, people began saying, wow, corporations have extraordinary scale and expertise, transportation, infrastructure. They can do a lot more than we thought. Maybe companies can and should be playing a greater role in our society. So Andy then goes on to promote the notion that all of these issues that we've been talking about are ones for virtually every industry. And this is just a very short list of some of the different issues that different industries are trying to address. And the important thing here is that he doesn't see these just as challenges, but he really sees them, as Peter Drucker does, he sees them as business opportunities. So now he's going to try to make a little bit of a pitch about sustainability to the corporations that he's thinking of approaching to be clients. So he talks about sustainability. The classic definition, it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And then he goes on to talk about an intrinsic development from 1999. So the Dow Jones created a special index that includes a group of companies who make sustainability central to their work. And their focus is on sustainable practices, long-term shareholder value, not just short-term. But the important thing is they are seeing all of these challenges as really business opportunities. And the way that he tries to show that this really is a business opportunity is by doing something that corporate leaders love to look at, which is looking at the stock exchanges. So he's got this cool chart here covering a period of several years, 2005 to 2007, I believe, which is the period leading up to when he did this PowerPoint. And just very quickly, he's got the Dow Jones, that's the blue line slowly going up. The red line is the S&P 500, that's slowly going up. He's got the NASDAQ, the green line, that's slowly going up. And then he's got this yellow, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And he wants to show what happens to those companies that are taking sustainability a little bit more seriously. And as you can see with the yellow line, he's trying to show them that not only is sustainability a good thing to do, it's profitable. I want to say one thing before we move on, and that is that one of the problems with the Dow Jones Sustainability Index is that not long after Andy put this presentation together, we had a little oil spill off the coast of Louisiana, and that was the BP oil spill. Many of you probably remember that. Worst oil spill in American history. And a lot of people commented on the fact that BP was on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So what does that really say about Andy's case? So that's just a parentheses, but something to really think about. So going back to this awkward handshake now, Andy Savitz trying to create a business case for the triple bottom line. And he's trying to show that the way that companies can create a sweet spot for themselves is by thinking about new products and services, new ways of doing business, new markets, better management, and performance. And he gives us two examples. A couple more than that. Anybody know what this is?
Prius.
You got it. Anybody know what year? This is the very first one.
07 or 08?
I think it was actually all the way back to 97.
Wow.
The very first one. And why do you think Andy Savitz wants to show a very homely, early Toyota Prius to prospective clients?
Because it made money and improved the environment by having better mileage.
It did both of those things for sure. And what's interesting here is that Toyota was way out in front when it provided this car. It was the first company to actually create this hybrid technology and the first company to actually make money off of it. And Andy wants people to know that Toyota didn't just do this, they had to make two big bets. First, they had a bet that people's interest in green issues would continue to become more and more prominent. And the second big bet he took, or the Toyota took, was that people would actually drive a newfangled vehicle, that there will be enough early adopters to want to drive a hybrid vehicle, people not knowing how long a hybrid battery would last or how the car drove or whether it was safe or anything. Toyota actually won both of those bets. People were willing to drive a hybrid car and interest in green technology continued to increase. But here's the thing, Toyota makes a huge number of gas guzzling cars and trucks. So why do you think having this hybrid vehicle, which is not contributing so much to their bottom line, helps them a little bit, but why do you think having this Prius was so important to Toyota beyond the money?
Image.
Yeah, image.
Image, okay. Any other thoughts?
Testing the future.
Okay. Testing the water, so to speak, right?
New market, new target market,
Yeah, who would the new market be?
environmentalists.
Okay, yeah. Any other thoughts?
Maybe somebody at Toyota was just smart enough to figure out where this country or this world was going in terms of using oil and petroleum products, that was not going to be the future at some point.
Right. So maybe hedging their bets a little bit.
Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense. Any other thoughts or comments? Has anybody in this Zoom call ever owned a Toyota Prius?
Yes,
You have.
Yeah.
How did you like it, Ed?
I liked it a lot. I had 2 generations and 3 generations.
So do you mind if I ask you why you bought it?
To conserve energy and I like the car.
Okay. Anyone else have a Prius?
I do.
Okay. Tell us why you bought it.
I felt I wanted to do the right thing for the environment. And by the way, I'd save a little money on gasoline.
Sounds like you're a pretty practical guy and have some strong ethics behind it.
We bought a Honda Civic hybrid. If I could just throw that in there.
It was what?
We bought a Honda Civic hybrid.
Yeah.
2003.
And why did you buy it?
To be ordinary.
The reason we bought a hybrid was to, because we cared about what was happening with climate change and fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And the reason I bought a Civic is that they had a manual shift.
Okay. So one of the interesting things about Toyota is that even though this car is not the car that's determined whether they're successful or not, they're using it as a kind of a halo product. A halo product meaning that the hybrid technology, a green car, casts a bright light over the brand. People think differently and they think better of Toyota because they have this wonderful halo product, even though it's a tiny percentage of the number of cars and trucks that they really sell. Most of their other products are pretty gas guzzling, big cars and big trucks, but the halo of the Prius has helped Toyota immeasurably. And the other big reason for Toyota is that car companies in particular are really afraid of bad publicity. And one way to mitigate risk is to create a product that gives people a good feeling about the brand. So that if, God forbid, something happened to Toyota products, people might think, yeah, but that's the company that manufactures the hybrid Prius. No, they can't be all bad. So this is an example of a company going out front, being a leader, and doing something that helped them financially in terms of their bottom line, but did a tremendous amount for their social and their environmental bottom line as well. Let's take a look now at GE, a very different kind of a company. And again, this awkward handshake between business and society. Can GE find a way to increase profits and address climate change? And one way that GE began to think about this was to create a whole division called Eco-Imagination. And Eco-Imagination is focused specifically on wind and solar power, gas turbines, fuel-efficient jet engines, and hybrid locomotives. The New York Times had an article yesterday about the largest turbine wind power plant in American history that's going to be built about 15 miles off of Martha's Vineyard. And they decided to go with GE to build those wind turbines. So for them, they could have decided to focus on coal plants. And in the short run, they probably would have made a lot more money. But they chose a long-term strategy, and they are now in a position where it can be profitable as well as helping to address climate change, according to Savitz. So I'm curious, when you see this chart, what's your reaction?
I mean, my impression was that GE is having a difficult financial time now. So, this chart was probably done, more than 10 years ago. I don't know how much of this they actually have done. Other than what you just said about the turbines.
Right. Well, they do have a division called Eco-Imagination. That's I think it's like a $12 billion division that's been very successful. But I think one of the challenges is that their stockholders may be looking for things that are going to make more money more quickly. So that's been a challenge for them for sure. Are you guys buying this framework, or do you have hesitancy about what you're seeing?
No. I'm
wondering about
hopeful.
gas turbines.
Excuse me?
I'm sorry, I was wondering about gas turbines.
Yeah. I have to admit, I'm not a gas turbine expert, but it is a form of a clean technology. Again, these are the kinds of things that either do not use oil or use much less oil or coal. So I think that's what they're going for alternative fuel sources that can also be used at great scale. Judith, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was just looking through yesterday's paper to try to find the article.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I want to give you one more example that Andy provides and get your feedback for that one too. So this is the company that makes all those delicious products that I eat when I'm sitting on the couch on Sunday afternoon watching the Patriots games. PepsiCo, Doritos, you name it, they make it. They make a lot of money on it. So the question is, how could PepsiCo have a sweet spot that deals with that awkward handshake, increasing profits, but also addressing public health? And the way that Savitz looks at it is by having PepsiCo specifically look at the fastest growing segment of the food market, and that's healthy food products. That's the segment that's really growing. So what does PepsiCo do? It acquires Quaker Oats and Tropicana, and there are numerous other products in that category that they've been acquiring over the years. Interestingly, Indira Nooyi, a wonderful woman who ran PepsiCo for many years, got a lot of negative feedback from her stockholders when she adopted this healthy food product strategy. Anybody want to guess why?
Is it not as profitable as selling the junk food?
That's actually pretty accurate, Judy, because what happened is that, in fact, each of these products that they acquired, every healthy food product, it was profitable. The problem was that they weren't making enough money quickly enough for the shareholders. And what this really revealed, we've seen this over the last 10, 12 years, is that you can't just look at short term, you have to look long term. But stockholders are being driven by short term profits. They don't want to look over 10 years. So even though she did, I think, the right thing, and she chose acquisitions that were profitable, there were many people in her company who felt like, wow, we need to make more money and we need to make it more quickly. We don't like the long-term approach. We want to be back in the old world where we were only focused on short-term. So these are some of the areas that Andy Savitz was able to bring forward. And I'm going to stop sharing, bring us all back so we can see each other. And I'm curious to know if you are buying this idea that he has about companies having a sweet spot, something where they can increase their profits or improve their markets, but also do something that will be helpful to society. You guys buy that?
Yes.
So I find a lot of this sounds like greenwashing.
Okay.
Like you said, that Toyota makes an awful lot of money on gas guzzling, cars and trucks. They do a lot of really big vehicles. They went in with Trump on the lawsuit against the California fuel efficiency standards. So, I mean, how much of an impact is any of this really having? I mean, Robert, you were saying that GE, some of their wind turbine stuff is
no,
actually
it's the gas turbine.
Oh, gas turbine are actually really inefficient, also very gas guzzling.
Yeah. Right. So you think that this is a way for companies to do a more sophisticated kind of greenwashing than perhaps they did in the past?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that was true with, I remember reading an article right after the, the BP Horizon oil spill in the Gulf, saying that BP got a pass for they claimed, got a pass for a longer period than, say, Exxon would have for that same, and it wasn't just that. BP had a massive explosion in Houston that killed a few people, but that because of the reputation that they created with their, beyond BP, they had their sunflower and they had their whole, renewable strategy, that gave them a lot of credibility that it had to go through several disasters to use up, whereas Exxon would have got slapped around by the media pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, BP used to be called British Petroleum, and they supposedly became a more sustainable company, and they changed their name to Beyond Petroleum. But of course, we saw through all of these various incidents and accidents and corporate crises that changing your name doesn't necessarily mean that you change your practices. And so the halo of having a new name didn't really help them when their practices were really, really so dangerous in so many respects. Anyone else? Yes, Edis?
Edith.
Edith, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So it's interesting because I was looking on the Fidelity website today to try and buy stocks for my nephews as part of their Hanukkah presents. And there's a whole...
I wish I was one of your nephews. Okay. They're very lucky people.
Thank you. So anyways, but there's a whole section on there about how you can look up the social impact of each stock and how they're rated. So obviously this marketing technique or whatever, it is meaningful to enough people that Fidelity has, that it's rated right on their website.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up because this is really a shocking development, how social responsibility has gone mainstream. And in just about 4 minutes, we're going to be circling back to your comment about impact investing and how investors are really interested in seeing how companies are matching up to some of their own values. So thank you. Any other thoughts or questions about the sweet spot framework? Did anybody else have some concerns about greenwashing? Yes. Barbara, do you want to unmute, please?
I'm trying. Hi.
There you go.
I do, because it's my understanding from what I've read and what I've been told by people in the field that the companies put frosting on the cake with that doesn't stop them necessarily from using 13-year-olds, from, putting bad things in the water, that there has to be something that deals with what they do across the broad swath of their products, that it can't be, you have this sweet spot. It has to be much more frost the whole cake kind of thing.
Right.
Is my concern.
Thank you. One of the big criticisms of what Andy Savitz did is that he cherry picked. He looked at a company, he found things that made sense, and none of what he said was untrue, but he cherry picked things that the companies that are doing that really make a lot of sense from a sustainability standpoint, but maybe ignoring lots of other things that the company was doing that didn't fit that perspective and didn't fit on that slide and didn't help him make the presentation to get a new client that he wanted to. But all I'm saying here is that there are different ways of thinking about the world, and thinking about companies that are operating in ways that you might not particularly like. They might still have a sweet spot that has to do with sustainability that can push this forward. Because they've got so much scale, they can move things. So Toyota, regardless of what you think about them, they were able, because of their scale and their technology, to push hybrid cars into the mainstream. And I think they deserve some credit for that. Not credit for other things, but maybe credit for that. So I'd like to move on and just share a couple of quick ideas here about companies that perhaps you ought to be thinking about for the future. These are a couple of companies that have been in the news. Some of you've heard of some of these and some not, but Unilever is the company that is generally considered to be the pioneer in the triple bottom line world. They have created a huge sustainable living plan. Every single part of their company is focused on meeting goals. They're the first company that decided that virtually every single employee is going to have their compensation tied to a triple bottom line goal. So it's not just something that the CEO wants to do, but when you go for your annual review as an employee, you've got your sustainability goals written out. And if you accomplish them, you're more likely to get your raise than if you didn't. And a lot of people feel that if you don't bring it right down to that level and give every employee responsibility for something to do with sustainability, that you won't really make it happen. So embedding sustainability is one of the chief challenges. Unilever is addressing it head on. The other thing Unilever is doing that's really revolutionary is it's the first major company that said, hey, we believe that sustainability is a long-term endeavor. And so we are not going to issue quarterly statements because it's not a short-term plan. So can you imagine a major company saying to their investors, sorry, we're not going to issue quarterly statements anymore. So this is a really big deal. It's radical. And a lot of people believe that if Unilever fails, that it will be the end of the sustainability movement in the corporate world as we know it. But if it succeeds, a lot of corporations will say, gee, maybe there's a different way to do things. Maybe there's a long-term way of thinking that works better. Another company you may be familiar with, Starbucks, very progressive in many, many respects, providing health benefits, insurance, scholarships, access to community programs, employee engagement, and amazing partnerships that they've created with nonprofits. One of them is with Conservation International, a nonprofit that helps them to work with coffee growers to sustain their agriculture and to protect the land that they grow their produce on. And in this way, Starbucks is able to get the coffee beans that it needs, but also to have the quality of shade-grown coffee that it needs for its product. So a great partnership. But one of the challenges with Starbucks that I have is that the model is based on the fact that when you are a premium product and you're selling something for many, many times what it costs to produce, so you're buying a $4 or $5 latte and the cost of those coffee beans is a lot less, then you have built into that model lots of profit, and you can do a lot of things with that profit to help your employees. A lot of companies are not selling a premium product. They don't have that huge profit amount built in. And so it's going to be more difficult for them to do as many things as they might like. But I say kudos to Starbucks for having built that in. Another company a lot of people talk about is Walmart, a company that's done an incredible amount of work in the green space. And if you go to their website, they have a huge corporate responsibility report and very detailed offerings about something that they called a regenerative approach. And it involves packaging, transport, buildings. They are trying to reinvent the single-use plastic bag, and they're partnering with Target and CVS on that. They are changing how people think about sustainable sourcing. They are trying to go zero emissions for the entire company by 2040. They are restoring land and ocean space. They are looking to do sustainably sourced fresh beef. They have gone to their suppliers and they've said, hey, remember when you used to give us boxes this big? Well, guess what? Now they have to be this big. And if you're not willing to save money on packaging, we won't put your stuff in our warehouses, in our stores anymore. So imagine if the federal government told companies that they had to save money, cut down fewer trees, and reduce their packaging. They might not like it. But when Walmart tells its suppliers, you got to do it, guess what? 99% of them listen to Walmart and they reduce their packaging. But here's the question. What's wrong with Walmart? If they're doing all this great stuff, are there any negatives there?
They've been criticized for their labor practices.
Labor practices? Anyone specifically that you're aware of?
Isn't the
Well, they
minimum wage?
discourage unionization.
Opposed to unionization? Okay.
Yeah. And they don't get, I don't know, and one time they were not giving benefits to part-time employees.
Right.
Okay. Ann Mara?
Well, I was just going to say they don't pay their full-time workers really a living wage. People who work
Okay.
there can afford to shop.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, there's a statistic on the number of Walmart employees that are on welfare.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else have some issues with Walmart?
I mean, I am aware of their sustainability efforts, and it is quite remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, particularly what they're doing in terms of outfitting their buildings and their supply chain, and what they're doing with their trucks and warehouses. They've invested an enormous amount of money in hybrid and electric vehicles, for example, just, incredible amount of money. Frankly, a lot of people are shocked and they don't know why they're investing quite as much as they are. But I will tell you, one theory is that Walmart believes that Walmart and Amazon are going to be the only two big players left at some point. In order to keep pace with Amazon, they have to do better in the environmental world. They have to use that as an opportunity to stay ahead of Amazon. So we'll see. We'll see. Finally, I just want to mention a local company you're probably not familiar with. It's based in Waltham. It is what's called a social purpose for-profit company. In other words, it was created with a specific purpose of doing something positive in the world. It takes recycled plastics, including number 5 plastics. And these are the plastic yogurt cups that nobody else wants. They figured out how to recycle them. And they create everything from toothbrushes, plates, bowls, cutlery, and a lot more. And they've been very successful. Their problem is that they don't have the scope that a company like Walmart has. But one thing they do have is a great partnership with Whole Foods. And when Whole Foods decided recently that they wanted to get rid of plastic cutlery and they wanted to have reusable cutlery to become more efficient, they went to preserve. And that's become a huge area of business opportunity for them. Does anybody have any companies that you think we ought to be keeping an eye on in terms of their ability to push a really strong sustainability program forward?
Tesla.
What?
Tesla.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other company that comes to mind?
Patagonia.
Patagonia, okay.
Solar.
Solar.
IKEA.
IKEA?
Yes.
Why do you suggest IKEA?
Because I know that they have, I think they have started some sustainability measures where you can bring back your old furniture.
Okay.
And they give you a bit of a refund, and then they try to, I guess, upcycle it, recycle it.
Okay. Okay. Any companies that you feel are particularly egregious that you just can't stand because of their practices?
I'd like to bring up the entire automotive industry as far as their practices are concerned. I think we all remember in the 1970s when everyone was talking about miles per gallon, and we thought they were selling their vehicles on the basis of the fact that they were more efficient than the next guy. And that's all gone by the boards. And yet there's still a problem with carbon emissions and carbon use. And yet the miles per gallon, while they've improved, they could do a lot more instead of selling these huge gas guzzlers. We talked about the Prius, but what is it that we can do as a society to do something about the fact that you have cars that weigh 4,000 pounds to carry a woman around that weighs 120 pounds? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And if you drive around anywhere now, you drive around Wellesley, you see that 3 out of 4 cars are these huge cars that make more profit for these companies. And it seems that there's no end in sight, and they're resisting the idea of having better miles per gallon. And we've seen that some of the rollback of some of the Obama requirements. But what can we do about giving them some social responsibility with respect to climate change and carbon emissions?
Yep.
It's just, I find it outrageous. I maybe it's just me, but I drive around and I see people in these cars. I say, what is it about these cars that people want? They think they're safer? They're not safer.
Well, I share your outrage. I would love to get some response from folks about this. Whether those cars are being driven in Wellesley or Newton, it's the same. It's the same problems. I would love to get some response from folks.
Michael, I have an idea. They're status cars is what it comes down to. There's a lot of status that is involved in being able in driving a car like that. And so the narrative needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that we're doing things that are socially responsible and environmentally responsible, and that we're taking a stance and showing that to our kids and as a community, and putting the rest aside. I mean, I'm a Californian, and we had the same exact thing going on in California, and it was all about, you know, what you could afford and showing the rest of the world what you could drive. And yet other people were taking the flip side of that and saying, I don't want a big car because it's not environmentally responsible.
So Ann, I'm going to ask you and also everyone else, what about a Tesla? Do you think that's a way for people to show status and also be environmentally friendly, in your opinion?
I know I'm seeing a number of people do that, but
I'm coming to you, Ann. Yeah. Okay. And Mara, yeah.
Okay, so we have Tesla, one of the very first ones, and it was a huge status symbol when we first got it. Our son was so impressed.
I didn't mean to imply that you needed any status. I was talking about the other folks.
Fine, I need the status. I need all of it that I can get.
Our son was so impressed, but now everybody has them. He says it's not a big deal anymore. So they're not really.
But I had wanted to jump in because I want to build on what Ann Wasson said to bring it back to the investing, because I think she's right. You have to change the social narrative, and you do that by changing people's perception. And it's the people that matter, I think, in this socially investing sphere, because you mentioned, Michael, and I think this is always the conflict for corporations, that they're driven by quarterly earnings. You have to show profits to your shareholders. In fact, you're legally obligated to maximize shareholder value as a publicly traded corporation. But if you're taking a long-term view of sustainability, it's a long-term view. And so you may actually want to underperform what you could possibly do in one quarter in order to have a longer-term better performance. The stock market's not as it's currently put together going to reward you for doing that. And so as investors, we need to be willing to reward those companies that are taking the longer view and underperforming. So if I'm a PepsiCo shareholder, I need to shut up about Quaker Oats not delivering that extra 5 cents per share in profit and know that my company is doing the right thing.
Great, thank you. Anybody else here who drives a Tesla or a hybrid?
I have an electric hybrid.
Go ahead, Robert. Yep.
Michael, just following up on that comment about the stock market. What is your feeling about the long-term stock exchange that some people have started up in, I think, in Silicon Valley?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question. Can you say it again?
There's something that folks, I think in Silicon Valley, have started up called the long-term stock exchange. I think I got it right, LTSE. I know it only just started, but I think it's built around the idea of not reporting quarterly profits.
So to be honest, I've heard of that, but I'm not really familiar with it. So I'm gonna hold back on really making a comment until I actually learn more about it. But I think that the fact that that even exists points to the fact that there's a lot of frustration building out there. A lot of frustration. And there's two things that people are frustrated about. One is that in our current government situation, where we used to be going toward stricter fuel standards, now under more recent administration, the fuel standards were relaxed. So we're going to see what happens under the next administration. But what we're seeing for the auto companies is that for the most part, unless government steps in and regulates, they're going to keep making those SUVs and trucks, those 4,000-pound vehicles where a person drives around Wellesley and maybe they're feeling safer. But that's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. And, you know, looking back some years ago, automakers said, we're not going to put in seatbelts into our cars. And it took the government to step in and say, oh, yes, you are. So governments do have an important role to play. In other countries, in Europe, for example, governments have been a lot more aggressive about telling people what the fuel standards need to be. And in China, as an example, my younger son has lived in China for 7 years. We went to visit him recently, and in Beijing, the pollution was so bad that they had to make some major changes in order to clean the air up in time for the Olympics. And the thing they did was that they told people that if you have an even license plate, you can drive into Beijing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And if you have an odd number license plate, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So how do you think people got around it?
2 cars.
2 cars.
2 cars. Yeah. People got around it. Yeah. Another thing they did in Beijing recently was that there were a whole slew of thousands of factories and hundreds of thousands of homes right outside Beijing. And the government decided that they were polluting the city too much. And so they just tore them down. They tore down the factories and they relocated all the people. And nobody had any say in the matter whatsoever. So that's a different approach. Not recommending it here, but everybody is struggling with it. Judith, did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say that during the Obama years, I had a Subaru and I needed a new one. And their mileage was pretty good at the time. And their new car was going to be heavier to get around what Obama was asking the car companies to reach in terms of mileage.
Right.
And so at that point, I left Subaru.
Yeah.
And I have a small Jetta wagon.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when it's in the parking lot next to the big SUVs.
Yep.
That's the wagon, it's small.
The reason I'm asking you about your cars, I don't want to be too personal, but you know, we drive our cars almost every day. It's something that's in our lives that we can't really escape. Most of us kind of need our cars. And it's a way that we do express how we feel about sustainability every single day. And every day I get into my car, which is a 2011 Ford Fusion, and I think, I really should be driving a hybrid or an electric car or something that's maybe a little bit smaller, and my kids have grown up, and do I really need that big back seat? And it makes me think about it every single day. And I think that's a good thing. I think it has to filter down to every individual. And I also think that big companies do respond. So there was a time some years ago when we had huge spikes in oil prices and people were buying smaller cars. And companies did respond by building better, smaller cars, but only for a while. And eventually people got into their SUVs and their trucks and they like them. And it's a difficult challenge to change consumer habit. So yes, Miriam?
I'm going to say that right now in Wellesley, like in a lot of communities, there's a concern over the gas emissions, the noise pollution, as well of landscaping equipment. And, you know, I kind of feel like there's some sort of a parallel to be made with how attitude might change. A long time ago, smoking, you know, it wasn't a problem. The companies, tobacco companies, got off really easily. They even said it was good for you. And I think little by little, the government had to crack down and say, look, it's really not good. And I feel like the same thing is going to have to happen here with, for example, landscaping equipment. And at some point, it will not look very chic if you've got some landscaping people out there over manicuring your yard and with the emissions, and the landscaping companies themselves will want to appear a bit more earth friendly. So I do think there's a status symbol, or yeah, and the government has to sort of take that lead somehow.
Well, it's going to be interesting. You know, the leaf blowing situation, just another example of how people are struggling with trying to get the right balance. And in this country, we found out about COVID and wearing masks. People are not crazy about government regulation of any kind, even when it seems to be an immediate life-saving situation and a public health issue, how difficult it is to convince people even in the short term. So looking long-term down the road, pollution caused by cars, it's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. I would like to, since time is running short, move on to our last subject for conversation and get your feedback on this as well. And this is the idea of using our funds and our investments to make what are called sustainable, responsible, or impact investing. And this is the idea that we can take categories of core values, environmental, social, and governance values that every company has to address in some way, shape, or form. These are just a few examples. There are many, many more that you could come up with. These are some of the core ones that you see most typically. And there are now funds that you can invest in that supposedly, and I use the word supposedly with emphasis, address each of these issues in a meaningful way. And I say the word supposedly because, unfortunately, in the impact investing world, there are many companies that have taken existing funds that are really not ESG funds, and they've simply slapped the name green or ESG onto their fund. And many unsuspecting investors are putting their capital into things that really are not connected to the ESG world. Unfortunately, it's a kind of a Wild West area, but it's something that is worth watching because I believe that impact investing is the intersection between finance and social justice. And I will tell you that at the Heller School, I teach in a social impact MBA program. And every year I have more and more students coming in who want to focus on this as a career. So are there any questions about what ESG is before we go on? I have a couple of thoughts about this as it relates to Reform Judaism.
So I actually wanted to bring the discussion back around to nonprofits.
Okay.
And how this is relevant to, so especially like the green team, because we'd like to see, and I'm sort of speaking for myself, but triple bottom line being something that we do as a nonprofit with every decision that the temple makes. So right now the green team is sort of off to the side, and some of the things you're talking about, like having sustainable funds and things, it's sort of an off to the side, not the mainstream thing that people do. And instead, we feel like this should be core to the values of TBE. So it's not quite directly related to your investing, but it is, because it's about how we spend money and all those sorts of things.
Sure. And anybody want to comment on that? I'd love to hear any thoughts on that.
So it turns out that there are some pretty significant impact investment funds related to racial justice. And this is a program that we hope to bring to TBE and to educate people about it. One of the major ones, the Boston Impact Investing Fund, is run by Deborah Fries. And it's really quite reputable and successful. But now that Miriam brought that up, I can see, like, how would we persuade the temple that they should invest in a racial justice impact fund or a green impact fund? It's going to set up some interesting tensions, or potentially.
I'm really glad you brought up Boston Impact Initiative. They're a phenomenal organization, in my opinion. Deborah Fries is a friend of mine, and she's spoken in my class a few times. And, you know, I think she represents somebody who really understands finance incredibly well and has figured out a way to help people make investments that will actually provide a real return to the investors, but also address racial justice issues. And she's somebody you should, if she would come speak to you, you would not be disappointed.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Barbara. Yep.
I think that the temple has to first take its place as a religious organization. And I think one of its core values, which I think is magnificent, is that nobody will ever be turned away from Temple Beth Elohim. And I think that it has to encapsulate within that core value a home, as it does, for people looking at racial justice issues and all those things. But I think it asks a lot of the temple, in trying times particularly, to, you don't want it not to do its job as a religious organization and one that embraces everyone. That's my feeling. And though I am sympathetic to all the other things, the temple has to value, you know, what it's in business to do, sort of.
Yes, but Barbara, the temple does invest and does have investment funds. So that is what we're talking about. And I don't think, Edith, that it needs to be at odds. I really do believe that sustainability and racial justice go hand in hand. And if you have sustainable practices, you know, that are shared maybe in the Black community, say, for instance, that's only going to bring everybody up and help everybody. So, and as we heard from our speaker last 2 months, well, in October, about health versus and sustainability and how that affects everybody. So I think that there's a crossover and we don't have to be at odds.
You're right. You're right. Thank you, Cheryl. You're right.
I want to share something interesting from the New York Times from this weekend. They had a lengthy article about impact investing and Reform Judaism. And the author spoke to the URJ conference several years ago. And he noted that the URJ pension board decided to make an agreement with a company that provides an ESG fund. And they created an ESG investment option for the 403B plan for the URJ employees. And apparently the board used 100 years of social justice resolutions from the URJ to shape the composition of the portfolio. And then it added another tenet into its investment philosophy in order to own additional shares of companies that were Israeli or had made investments in Israel. And despite the fact that they made these, they worked very hard on creating this, the CEO of the URJ pension board noted that only about 2% of his retirement plan's money has actually moved to this new ESG fund, even though many of its rabbis are social justice warriors. I'm reading that from the New York Times, but it's interesting to see that the URJ is one of the organizations that's struggling and grappling with whether these ESG funds are worth investing in, and how do you convince people of that? And, where do we stand? So you guys are right in the middle of it. I think that's fascinating. Yeah. Is there a investment committee at the temple that actively looks at these kinds of impact investing funds? Or I'm not really familiar with it, so I'm just asking.
To my knowledge.
I've asked the question once about where our endowment is invested, and it's invested by an organization that I think a number of synagogues, and I think CJP invests in. I looked them up. It was fairly opaque about where they invest. I would have to believe, given that they're really investing money from Jewish organizations, that they certainly have some screens on where they're investing, but I haven't yet found out where those are. I have no idea. I assume the temple has like the equivalent of a 401k plan for the employees, but I actually don't know that.
Right.
Anybody know that?
I'm sure they have that. There is, when the endowment fund was first set up 20 years ago, we had an endowment investment committee, and I'm pretty sure that it continues today. It was originally a fund that was an organization managed by Beth Israel Hospital. And then CJP came in and Care Group, and then and Temple Beth Elohim was the first synagogue to join 20 years ago. And then they opened it up to other synagogues. So I'm pretty sure that's still the structure that exists.
Right. I mean, one of the big challenges here is that these ESG funds tend to charge higher rates because they're actually doing more work, and they're building screens. They're taking out companies that deal with gun manufacturing and alcohol and so forth and cigarettes. And they're sometimes including companies that meet certain other sustainability standards. And they charge you for that because it's not just a simple algorithm. And the other thing is that what's a socially responsible fund for you may not be a socially responsible fund for me. So for example, one impact investing company came to speak in my class, and they said that they were approached by a social justice Catholic organization on the West Coast, and they put together this great portfolio, and they brought it to them and they rejected it. And they said, well, why? And they said, well, you've got Microsoft in this portfolio. And they said, well, what's wrong with Microsoft? And they said, well, the Microsoft Foundation supports Planned Parenthood. And we're a Catholic organization, so you got to take that out. And another investor was working with a couple, and they wanted a socially responsible fund. And he said, oh, by the way, do you have any specific parameters? And they said, well, nothing really. It's just that every company has to agree to adhere to Sharia law. So that was their prevailing view. So what's socially responsible for you may not be for me. So it's going to be interesting to see how the URJ comes down and whether they find they're going to put more of their pension money in these funds. And it's going to be interesting to see whether TBE decides to become more activist in telling its investment committee where it wants to put its money. Because, for example, you mentioned Boston Impact Initiative. I think it's a great organization, but that's being really assertive in saying how you use your resources out in the community. And most temples are not there yet, but it would be interesting to see what would happen if Temple TBE decided to display its values in a really assertive way like that.
It seems like a lot of universities, like Wellesley College, a lot of universities are going that route where they really don't want to invest in, for example, in fossil fuel companies. They, you know, and that's part of they're concerned about it, obviously, and it's the marketing of the college too. It's the way they present themselves.
You know, Susan, it seems like there's a critical mass sometimes on these issues. I'm old enough to remember when the apartheid issue in South Africa was a really big deal, and many universities didn't want to be involved in making decisions about South Africa, but then slowly universities began to say, well, we don't want to invest in companies that are connected to apartheid. And then slowly it built up, and then eventually nobody wanted to be connected to apartheid related companies. So there might be a kind of a turning point coming with fossil fuels. It's a good point that you raise, and it could be coming soon. Yeah. Go ahead, Eve. Yep.
Oh, I don't have a comment.
Oh,
I did. So when I raised this whole thing about nonprofits, it wasn't just about the investing, it was also about the running of the temple overall. And I get the comment about us being a religious organization, but it actually, you know, sustainability and repairing the world is fundamental to what we are as TBE. So, and I don't see it as a choice between being green and racial justice, because I think they're very inextricably linked. I don't see it as a choice as being financially responsible either, because you can do these things in a financially responsible way. It's really just speaking to our values and our values and how we run the temple. And to me, it should be integrated into everything we do and every decision that we make.
Okay. And I think, Miriam, one of the questions that I have, I'm only been a member at the temple for 2 years now, is I'm just beginning to learn how to understand how those values do get expressed in the different facets of the temple's work. So I'm here to be educated, not only tonight, but going forward about how that's actually happening. So we're nearing the end of our time. I would love to offer anyone some final thoughts or comments. We have just another couple minutes, and thoughts or comments about anything we've talked about tonight, or something new that just popped into your mind.
Sorry to dominate the mic a little bit from our house, but just very briefly, I've raised the triple bottom line concept with the leadership, and you know, at the annual meeting we put up our financials, and we actually at that meeting also recognize a lot of our, you know, religious and moral and social good that we do. You know, maybe not numerically, but actually, you know, we do identify a lot of things and recognize a lot of people. And so I think we're actually mostly there. And at the last congregational meeting, just by Zoom, we had a discussion about adding the environmental component to that. So I actually don't think it's a big lift, because obviously we are maybe we're a moral organization. I don't quite know how to express that, but I think it's not a heavy lift, and I think it's something we could do.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that TBE is very much a value-driven institution, and I don't think anybody questions that. The only real question is, how do you express those values? And you're obviously doing it very well in many areas. Maybe there's some areas you haven't thought about or touched on yet, but the world is changing also. So how do you, rethink each year how you express your values. And that's kind of an ongoing process. And that's why you have the Green Team, to kind of really serve as a laboratory for those kinds of discussions that are really critical. So when they come before the board, they have been mixed and sorted and cooked a little bit by your Green Team. And the ideas of not coming out half-baked, but they're really great ideas that you've actually been able to work on together. So
I think it goes beyond the Green Team. So Cheryl, I think it's something that we should strategize with Tikkun Olam leaders and figure out how we can put together some group that integrates a lot of different committee members and figure out how to approach this, how to study it, who we have to talk to, because we've had a heck of a time. I know you struggled to get the Vice President of Finance to sign off on some of the green improvements you wanted to make. And we have struggled to have them consider switching vendors to Black-owned businesses. So there's a certain resistance there. Yes, Miriam, it is part of our values, but there are some business people in there who have different opinions and political beliefs. And so I think if there's a way for us to circle around to some of the other Tikkun Olam committees.
Yeah. No, that was kind of my point. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when the Green Committee takes it on, we're kind of viewed as a little fringe and not central to the operations. And Cheryl's laughing. But I'd like to see that all of this, the racial justice and the green, and to be more central and us to be much more thoughtful about the way these decisions get made, and not, shunted aside, or the Green Team just worries about these little environmental things, and, and make it much more integral into the way the temple is run. And I think Neil Silverstein is really willing to listen to a lot of this.
Yeah.
So integrated rather than siloed. Well, I think it's getting late, so I want to thank Michael. This was wonderful, a great discussion. We hope you come back, because obviously there's more to talk about. But I really appreciate your doing this for us and being here. And I want to just put in a plug. We do have a very brief Green Team meeting on Thursday night. And I know it's Hanukkah, but it's after the meetings later, after you light your candles. And, because of COVID, we can't do big family things. So I hope that you'll all be available to come to the Green Team meeting on Thursday night and every month thereafter.
And I just want to thank Deb for being here. I want to thank Cheryl for pulling all this together. Thank all of you for your conversation. I enjoyed hearing your thoughts. Hope to see you all again, and have a happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Good night.
Yep. Good night.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Thanks, Edith. We'll talk.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Everybody leave, I guess. Thank you so much, Deb.
It was my pleasure. It was an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll end it now. Thank you. See you again. I hope our paths will cross.
Yes, hopefully soon, huh? in person.
In person. Be well, Cheryl.
You too.